Nobody in that packed Atlanta nightclub expected the night to end with fists flying, drinks crashing to the floor, and Kirk Frost standing over Lil Scrappy while security fought to pull everybody apart. But that is exactly what happened, and the footage spreading online has fans asking one question: what pushed Kirk Frost and Young Jock to allegedly turn on Lil Scrappy in the middle of a crowded club? Witnesses say the tension started long before the first punch was thrown. What looked like a regular night out between familiar faces quickly turned into chaos after a private conversation at the VIP section took a dark turn. Voices got louder, tempers rose, then suddenly, chairs moved, bottles dropped, and people started screaming as the confrontation exploded right in front of stunned partygoers. And here is where it gets even messier. Sources close to the situation claim this was not just about a nightclub argument. No, this was personal, deeply personal. Rumors are now swirling that hidden betrayals, money disputes, and loyalty issues had been building behind the scenes for weeks. Some insiders even say Lil Scrappy uncovered something involving Kirk Frost that was never supposed to come out, and Young Jock may have been caught in the middle. Fans are shocked because these three have crossed paths for years, but nobody expected things to reach this level. Emotions ran high, friendships shattered, and now the entire circle is being forced to pick sides. But what really happened inside that club that night? And what secret pushed everything over the edge? Because according to people close to the scene, this fight was only the beginning. The second Kirk Frost stepped into that VIP section, people could feel something was off. It was supposed to be a simple appearance, one of those late-night Atlanta club events where everybody from the city pulls up, takes pictures, shows love, and keeps the money flowing. But this night felt different. Lil Scrappy had already been there for over an hour, sitting with his people, laughing, drinking, and acting like nothing in the world could touch him. Witnesses said Scrappy looked relaxed at first, even posting clips on social media, showing off his table and shouting out fans. But what nobody knew was that just 20 minutes before Kirk arrived, Scrappy had gotten a text message that changed his whole mood. According to insiders, the message contained screenshots. Screenshots of a private conversation. And those screenshots allegedly involved Kirk Frost talking behind Scrappy's back about business, loyalty, and money. People close to Scrappy say he went quiet after reading it. His smile disappeared, his body language changed, and from that moment on, he was waiting. Not for the party, for answers. Then Kirk walked in with Young Jock right beside him, both dressed sharp, smiling, shaking hands, acting like it was just another night in the city. But the second Scrappy spotted them walking into VIP, his face turned cold. One witness said you could literally see the anger in his eyes. Kirk noticed it too. He tried to play it cool at first, dapping people up, sitting at a nearby table, but Scrappy kept staring. Young Jock reportedly leaned over and asked Kirk if everything was good, and Kirk allegedly said, he'll get over it. But Scrappy was not getting over anything. Because according to sources, those leaked messages were not small talk. They allegedly showed Kirk telling somebody that Scrappy was desperate for money and making bad business moves. Even worse, Kirk allegedly questioned Scrappy's loyalty to longtime friends. And that hit deep. Loyalty means everything in that circle. Especially when cameras are off. Things stayed tense for almost 10 minutes. The music kept blasting, people kept dancing, but in that VIP section, the energy was heavy. Scrappy kept whispering to his boys, looking over at Kirk. Then Kirk made the first move. Witnesses say Kirk walked over to Scrappy's table, trying to clear the air before things got worse. Kirk reportedly said, "Man, what's your problem tonight?" Scrappy stood up slow, looked Kirk right in the eye, and said, "My problem is fake people sitting in my face acting real." That line alone made the whole table freeze. Kirk looked confused at first, but Scrappy pulled out his phone and showed him the screenshots. Kirk's face changed immediately. No smile, no calm energy, just tension. Kirk allegedly told Scrappy, "You believe everything you see now." But Scrappy wasn't hearing it. Scrappy fired back, "This came from your mouth. Your words. Don't play with me." Young Jock stepped in, trying to calm things down, telling both men it was not the place for this. But that only made things worse. Because Scrappy turned to Jock and said, "And you knew too, didn't you?" According to witnesses, Jock looked stunned. He kept denying it, saying he had nothing to do with it. But Scrappy was not buying that either. The accusations started flying fast. Scrappy accused Kirk of setting up business deals behind his back. Kirk accused Scrappy of being paranoid and unstable. Jock kept trying to break it up, but both sides were too far gone. People around them started recording because they knew this was about to go left. Then came the twist nobody expected. A woman walked into the VIP section. Insiders claim it was someone connected to the entire drama, someone who had apparently been at the center of the leaked messages. The second Kirk saw her, his face dropped. Scrappy pointed at her and yelled, "Tell him what you told me." The woman looked nervous, shaking, caught in the middle of all the chaos. Kirk immediately shouted for her to stay out of it, but Scrappy kept pushing. "Tell everybody what's been going on." The woman finally spoke and allegedly said Kirk had been meeting privately with promoters to replace Scrappy in an upcoming event deal worth thousands. That changed everything. Scrappy lost it. According to witnesses, Scrappy slammed his drink on the table and stepped directly into Kirk's face. All the years of friendship, all the history, all the trust, gone in 1 second. Kirk pushed Scrappy back and said, "It's business, stop acting emotional." But for Scrappy, it was bigger than business. It was betrayal. Young Jock jumped in again, putting his hands between them, trying to separate both men. But Scrappy turned on Jock too, accusing him of knowing the whole plan from the beginning. Jock snapped back, saying, "Don't put that on me. I ain't your enemy." The shouting got louder. Security started moving closer. Club management noticed the situation escalating. But before security could step in, Scrappy said something that changed Kirk's whole mood. Witnesses claim Scrappy brought up Kirk's family, mentioning private issues involving Rashida Frost and saying Kirk should worry about his own house before speaking on another man's business. That hit Kirk hard. Emotions ran high instantly. Kirk's jaw tightened. His voice dropped. He warned Scrappy not to bring family into it. But Scrappy kept going. Fans standing nearby said you could feel the room stop moving. Nobody was dancing anymore. Everybody was watching. And then young Jock made a mistake that shifted everything. Trying to calm Scrappy down, Jock grabbed his arm. But Scrappy jerked away aggressively, yelling at Jock to keep his hands off him. That moment turned the argument physical. Kirk saw Scrappy shove Jock and reacted instantly, pushing Scrappy hard in the chest. Scrappy stumbled back into the table, bottles crashing everywhere. Women screamed. Security rushed forward. But before anyone could fully separate them, Scrappy lunged straight at Kirk, and that is when the entire nightclub exploded into chaos. Scrappy's body slammed into Kirk so hard that both of them crashed into the velvet ropes separating VIP from the main floor, and in seconds the whole section turned into pure chaos. Glasses shattered under their feet, bottles rolled across the floor, and security scrambled to grab whoever they could before things got worse. But it was already too late. Kirk threw a wild swing that barely missed Scrappy's face, and Scrappy came back harder, landing a shot right across Kirk's cheek that made the crowd scream. Young Jock stood frozen for half a second, looking like he could not believe how fast things had fallen apart, but then his loyalty kicked in. Witnesses say Jock jumped in, grabbing Scrappy from behind, trying to pull him off Kirk, but Scrappy twisted around and shoved Jock so hard that he stumbled backward into a table full of drinks. That shove changed everything. Jock's face went from shock to anger. According to people standing close enough to hear, Jock yelled, "Nah, now you playing with me." And that was the moment it stopped being a two-man problem. Now it was Kirk and Jock against Scrappy. Security was trying to force space between them, but the rage was too heavy. Scrappy kept yelling that Kirk was fake, that Jock was fake too, and that everybody in that room had been lying to his face for months. Kirk was yelling back, calling Scrappy ungrateful and reckless, saying nobody owed him anything. Fans in the club were recording every second, and within minutes clips were already being sent across Atlanta. But behind the fight was something even uglier than money. Because according to insiders, the event deal Kirk allegedly cut behind Scrappy's back was not the only secret. There was another layer, one involving a woman close to Scrappy's inner circle. And that secret was about to come out in the worst way possible. While security struggled to control the fight, the woman who had exposed Kirk's business moves suddenly started crying. Witnesses say she kept saying she did not want this to happen. Scrappy heard her and snapped, yelling across the room, "Tell them the rest." Kirk immediately shouted back, "Shut your mouth." But by then it was too late. According to sources, the woman admitted Kirk had not only been speaking badly about Scrappy's business, but had allegedly been encouraging someone close to Scrappy to distance themselves from him because his career was falling apart. That sentence hit Scrappy like gasoline on fire. His whole face changed. People say he looked hurt more than angry at first. Because betrayal from a friend cuts deeper than disrespect from an enemy. Scrappy stared at Kirk and said, "After all these years, that's what you think of me." Kirk looked frustrated and shouted back that he was trying to protect business, not destroy friendships. But Scrappy was not hearing any of it. He accused Kirk of moving like a snake, smiling in public while plotting in private. Then the room went silent when Scrappy pointed at Jock and asked one direct question. How long have you known? Jock hesitated, just for a second, but that second told Scrappy everything. Jock tried to explain that he had heard rumors but never believed Kirk would actually make moves without telling Scrappy. But to Scrappy, that was enough. Now the family was left divided. People who had known each other for years were suddenly on opposite sides. One of Scrappy's closest friends stepped in and told Kirk he needed to leave before things got uglier. Kirk refused. He said he was not running from anybody. That only made Scrappy angrier. He started pacing, breathing heavy, fists clenched, looking like he was fighting every urge to explode again. Then somebody from the crowd yelled that the footage was live online. That changed the pressure, because now it was not just private drama. Fans were watching in real time. Fans are shocked because what started as a rumor was now unfolding publicly. Comments flooded social media within minutes. Some blamed Kirk, some blamed Scrappy, some said Jock should have stayed out of it. But inside that club, nobody cared about social media yet. The real damage was happening face to face. Then came another twist. One promoter who had been hiding in the corner finally stepped forward and tried to explain himself. According to witnesses, he admitted Kirk had approached him about replacing Scrappy at the event, but claimed it was because Scrappy had become too unpredictable. Hearing that in front of everybody humiliated Scrappy. His pride took a direct hit. He turned toward the promoter and yelled, "Unpredictable because I speak the truth." Kirk tried to step in and calm the conversation, saying it was not meant to be personal. But Scrappy laughed bitterly and said, "Business is always personal when you call somebody family." Then Kirk fired back with something nobody expected. He said Scrappy had been falling apart for months, making bad choices, and everybody around him was tired of cleaning up the mess. That sentence cut deep. Scrappy's face dropped, because for a second, it felt less like an argument and more like years of hidden frustration finally coming out. Witnesses say Scrappy looked around the room, realizing people had probably been talking behind his back longer than he knew. Even some of his own people looked uncomfortable. The betrayal felt bigger now. Bigger than Kirk, bigger than Jock. It felt like the whole room knew something he did not. Then one voice broke through the tension. It was a friend of Scrappy's who shouted, "Kirk ain't the only one talking." And suddenly all eyes turned toward Jock. Jock looked stunned. He kept asking what that meant. But Scrappy's friend claimed Jock had also been in private meetings discussing Scrappy's future and whether he was still reliable for public appearances. Jock denied it instantly, swearing he never turned on Scrappy. But now doubt had entered the room. Scrappy looked at Jock differently. Not like a friend, like a suspect. And that hurt Jock, because according to witnesses, Jock stepped closer and said, "I stood beside you through everything. Don't disrespect me over gossip." But Scrappy was too far gone emotionally. He accused both men of building their own opportunities while quietly cutting him out. Kirk looked exhausted. He said Scrappy was blaming everybody else for his own problems. And then Scrappy said something that froze the room. He said if Kirk kept pushing, he would expose everything. Not just business, personal secrets too. Kirk's face turned pale. Jock looked confused. Security tightened around all three men, sensing this was not over. Because whatever Scrappy knew, it clearly scared Kirk. And just as Kirk stepped forward and demanded to know what Scrappy meant, a phone started ringing loudly in Scrappy's pocket. Scrappy looked at the screen, and the second he saw the name, his expression changed completely. Anger turned into disbelief. He answered, listened for 5 seconds, and then looked straight at Kirk and said, "So you really did it?" And Kirk's silence said more than words ever could. The entire VIP section went dead silent after those words. Scrappy stood there staring at Kirk like the last piece of the puzzle had finally fallen into place. The call had come from somebody Scrappy trusted, somebody who had been digging into the situation all night after hearing whispers about secret meetings and hidden contracts. According to insiders, the person on the phone confirmed that Kirk had signed papers earlier that day, locking in the event deal without Scrappy and officially replacing him. But that was not even the worst part. The deal had allegedly used Scrappy's own name and past connections to secure it. When Scrappy heard that, it felt like his entire loyalty had been used against him. He lowered the phone slowly, looked Kirk dead in the face, and said, "You built that deal off my back." Kirk tried to explain, saying it was never supposed to go this way, but Scrappy cut him off, yelling so loud the whole club heard it. "Never supposed to go this way? You planned this. You smiled in my face while taking food off my table." Emotions ran high instantly. Kirk's face turned red with anger. He fired back, saying Scrappy was acting like a victim when everybody had tried to help him for months. But Scrappy was beyond listening now. The betrayal had become too real. Young Jock stepped between them again, telling Scrappy to calm down and handle it like men. But Scrappy snapped at him, saying stop acting like you innocent. Jock looked hurt. Witnesses said you could see it in his face. Because no matter how ugly the night got, Jock still believed he could fix it. But then Kirk said something that pushed the whole situation over the edge again. Kirk admitted that yes, he made the deal, but claimed he had no choice because promoters no longer trusted Scrappy to show up, stay focused, or keep things professional. That hit harder than any punch. It was not just betrayal now. It was disrespect, public disrespect. Scrappy laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that comes right before somebody loses control. He stepped closer to Kirk and said, so all these years, that's what you think of me. Kirk answered coldly, I think you've been your own worst enemy. The room exploded with reactions. Some people gasped, some backed away, others kept filming, knowing this moment was going viral. Fans are shocked because this was not reality TV drama. This was real, messy, and personal. Then the woman who had exposed the secret earlier spoke again. Her voice was shaking. She said there was more. Everybody turned toward her. Kirk immediately yelled at her to stop talking, but she kept going. According to her, Kirk had not acted alone. Another person had been helping coordinate the deal behind Scrappy's back. When she said the name, the room froze. It was someone from Scrappy's own camp. One of his closest people. Somebody he had trusted for years. Scrappy looked across the room and saw him standing there, silent, avoiding eye contact. The betrayal hit even harder. Now the family was left divided in a way nobody expected. Scrappy walked over to him and asked one question. How long? The man stayed quiet. Scrappy asked again louder. How long? Finally, the man admitted it had been weeks. Weeks of meetings, planning, and talks about moving forward without Scrappy. He claimed it was because everybody thought Scrappy was becoming too unstable to work with. Scrappy looked like his heart had been ripped out. Witnesses say the anger in his face shifted into pain. Because finding out Kirk moved behind his back was one thing. Finding out his own people helped was something else entirely. Kirk tried to step in, saying it was not about hate, it was about protecting the money. But Scrappy turned and screamed, you protect money by destroying people? Then all hell broke loose again. Scrappy lunged, not at Kirk this time, but at the former friend who admitted the betrayal. Security rushed in, tackling Scrappy before he could reach him. Kirk and Jock got pulled back too, but Scrappy kept fighting, kicking, yelling, trying to break free. The whole club was in chaos. Tables flipped. People rushed toward the exits. Phones were everywhere. One witness said it looked like a war zone. Then came another twist nobody saw coming. Kirk's phone started buzzing nonstop. He checked it and his face dropped instantly. According to insiders, someone had leaked the contract online. The exact paperwork showing the event deal, the money, and the signatures. And now it was spreading everywhere. Kirk realized this was bigger than a nightclub fight now. His business reputation was on the line. Scrappy saw Kirk's reaction and laughed. That bitter laugh again. He said, now everybody sees who you are. Kirk denied being shady, saying the contract was legal and business was business. But the public was not seeing it that way. Within minutes, fans online were choosing sides. Some called Kirk disloyal. Some said Scrappy needed to grow up. And some blamed Jock for standing beside Kirk. But Jock had his own breaking point. After hearing his name dragged into the mess all night, Jock finally snapped. He turned to Kirk and demanded the truth. Did you really keep me in the dark? Kirk looked at him and said he only told him part of it. Jock's face changed. Now even Jock felt betrayed. Because Kirk had used his friendship too. That changed the energy completely. Now Kirk stood almost alone. Scrappy was furious. Jock was angry. The people around them were divided. And for the first time that night, Kirk looked nervous. One friend told Kirk he needed to leave before things got worse. Kirk agreed and started heading toward the exit with security around him. But as he walked away, Scrappy shouted something that stopped him cold. This ain't over. Kirk turned around and said, do what you gotta do. That cold response made it clear there was no fixing this tonight. But just as Kirk reached the club entrance, police lights flashed outside. Somebody had called law enforcement. The club owner was furious, demanding everybody involved leave immediately. Officers walked in asking questions, separating witnesses, checking footage, and trying to understand what happened. Scrappy was still breathing heavy, pacing back and forth, refusing to speak at first. Jock stood in the corner, staring at the floor, clearly rethinking everything he thought he knew. Kirk stayed quiet, surrounded by security, looking like a man realizing the consequences had just begun. And then one officer walked over to Scrappy and said they needed to talk about something serious. Because according to new information, this fight may not have started at the club at all. There had been threats earlier that day. Threats connected to a missing payment and a private argument that nobody in that room even knew about. And when Scrappy heard that, his eyes widened. Because if that was true, then somebody had been setting the stage for this explosion long before anybody walked into that nightclub. The officer standing in front of Scrappy repeated himself, saying they had reports of threats made earlier that day tied to a missing payment connected to the same event deal, and that detail changed the entire energy in the room because now this was no longer just a nightclub fight between Kirk Frost, Young Jock, and Lil Scrappy. It was turning into something deeper and more coordinated than anyone wanted to admit. Scrappy looked confused at first, still breathing heavy, sweat on his forehead, trying to process how a private business betrayal had turned into something involving threats and outside interference. Kirk from a distance overheard the mention of missing payment and immediately denied any criminal involvement, raising his voice saying this was business talk being twisted into something it was not, but the officer kept his focus on Scrappy, asking him directly if he had received any threats or warnings before arriving at the club, and that question made Scrappy pause because suddenly he remembered the text message from earlier. The same message that had shown him screenshots and set his mood off before Kirk even walked in, and now in hindsight it felt less like gossip and more like a warning that something bigger was already in motion. Young Jock stepped forward trying to explain to the officer that everything started with misunderstandings and heated emotions. But his voice lacked confidence because even he now realized there were pieces of the night he had not been fully aware of, especially after Kirk admitted he only told him part of the truth. Meanwhile, the crowd that had been filming everything was being pushed out of the club one by one, but the footage had already spread and people online were dissecting every second, calling it betrayal, calling it setup, calling it the end of friendships that once defined Atlanta's entertainment circle. Inside the club, Scrappy suddenly turned toward Kirk again, ignoring the officers, ignoring security, and said loudly that none of this would have happened if Kirk had not tried to move in silence behind his back. Kirk snapped back saying Scrappy was making himself the victim while ignoring the fact that promoters had lost trust in him, and that one sentence reignited the tension instantly. Scrappy stepped forward again but security blocked him, this time holding him tighter, while Kirk was escorted closer to the exit, but before he left he turned and said something that froze everyone, claiming that Scrappy should ask the people around him who had been feeding information both ways because this situation had more hands in it than just him. That statement hit like another bomb because it pointed back at Scrappy's own circle again, and now Scrappy looked around slowly at everyone who had been close to him all night, his expression shifting from anger to suspicion. The officer then received a message on his radio and walked a few steps away, returning with a more serious tone saying they needed statements from everyone involved because the earlier report included a possible coordinated confrontation, not just an argument, and that word coordinated made everything feel heavier. Young Jock immediately said he had nothing to do with any coordination and that he had been trying to prevent everything from escalating, but Scrappy did not respond to Jock anymore. Instead he looked toward the former friend who had already admitted involvement in the business side of things and said quietly that he wanted the full truth now. No more half explanations, no more shifting blame. The man hesitated again but then confessed that there had been meetings involving multiple people discussing Scrappy's reliability and scheduling issues and that Kirk had been under pressure from outside partners to stabilize the event lineup, but what he said next shifted the entire narrative again, because he admitted that someone else had been pushing for Scrappy to be removed entirely, not just from one event but from future collaborations as well, and when Scrappy asked who, the man looked down and said it was someone who benefited directly from Scrappy being out of the way. The room went silent again because that narrowed the circle even further. Kirk looked shocked now too, insisting he did not authorize anything beyond the single deal, and for the first time he sounded less angry and more defensive, like he was realizing he had been pulled into something larger than he controlled. Scrappy stood still processing it all, and for a moment it looked like the fight had burned itself out, replaced by confusion and disbelief. But then another officer walked in holding printed screenshots that had been circulating online, showing messages tied to scheduling changes and financial discussions, and asked Kirk if he recognized them. Kirk's silence answered before his words did, and that silence changed everything again, because it suggested there was truth buried inside the chaos. Young Jock rubbed his face in frustration saying this was spiraling beyond anyone's control, while Scrappy shook his head slowly saying all he wanted was honesty from the beginning, not damage control after everything exploded. But the real twist came when the officer revealed that the earlier threat report included a name connected to the missing payment, and that name matched one of the people already in the building who had not been fully questioned yet. Everyone turned at once, and the person stepped back instinctively, realizing they were now at the center of suspicion. Scrappy stared at them with disbelief. Kirk looked between them and the officers, trying to understand how the situation had expanded this far, and even Jock looked lost now, like he could not tell who was telling the full truth anymore. The officer instructed everyone to remain inside for formal statements, but Scrappy slowly shook his head, saying he was done talking for the night, that he had heard enough versions of the truth to understand where he stood. Kirk responded, saying it was never meant to become personal, but Scrappy cut him off, saying betrayal always starts as business until it ends up in personal destruction. Then without warning, Scrappy walked toward the exit past security, not rushing, not fighting anymore, just leaving, and nobody stopped him this time. Kirk watched him go with an expression that mixed frustration and regret, while young Jock stayed behind, speaking quietly with officers, trying to explain timelines and interactions, but even his voice sounded uncertain now because too many versions of events had surfaced in a single night. Outside the club, Scrappy stopped under the flashing lights of police cars and looked back at the building for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether this was the end of something or just the beginning of something worse. Inside, Kirk was being asked to clarify contracts, messages, and timing of deals that now looked more complicated than originally described, and somewhere in the middle of all this confusion, one question remained unanswered and heavier than everything else. Who actually started the chain that led to the attack? Because at this point it was no longer clear whether Kirk, Frost, and young Jock were reacting to Scrappy, or whether all of them had been pulled into a setup that none of them fully understood until it was already too late. And as Scrappy finally walked away into the night, the unanswered accusations, the broken friendships, and the hidden names still hanging in the air suggested that whatever happened inside that nightclub was not a conclusion, but the first visible crack in a much larger story that was still unfolding. Outside the nightclub, the flashing police lights painted everything in sharp, unstable colors as Scrappy stood near the curb, breathing slowly but still visibly shaken. The noise from inside had softened, but the weight of what just happened did not leave his face. Behind him, Kirk Frost was still inside speaking with officers, while young Jock stayed near the entrance trying to explain his side for what felt like the 10th time. But Scrappy was no longer listening to any of it. In his mind, the night had already split into two versions of reality, the one everyone saw, and the one that had been building long before anyone stepped into that club. A few fans who had gathered outside were still filming, whispering his name, replaying the moment the fight broke out, but Scrappy barely reacted. Instead, he pulled out his phone again, scrolling through messages that had been sent earlier that night. One name stood out, the same contact that had warned him before he arrived. His jaw tightened as he read it again, realizing that whoever sent it knew far more than they had admitted. Inside, Kirk was being asked about financial records tied to the disputed event deal. Officers were now comparing timestamps from messages, contracts, and reported conversations, trying to build a clear sequence of what triggered the confrontation. Kirk insisted repeatedly that he never intended for anything to turn violent, but investigators were focused less on intent and more on coordination. The word was being used again, and it was making everyone uncomfortable. Young Jock, standing nearby, finally asked for a moment to speak privately with Kirk. When they stepped aside, Jock lowered his voice and said he felt like both of them had been pulled into something without full transparency. Kirk responded quietly, saying he was pressured by outside discussions and that certain decisions were made under business stress, not personal revenge. But even as he said it, his tone lacked certainty, like he was realizing how many gaps existed in his own understanding of the situation. Scrappy, meanwhile, had started walking slowly away from the entrance, but stopped when he overheard part of a conversation behind him. One of the officers mentioned that the missing payment issue might involve multiple transfers through different accounts tied to promotional intermediaries. That detail changed Scrappy's expression again, because it suggested this was not a simple disagreement over one deal, but a structured financial shift involving more than one party. He turned back briefly, looking at the building as if trying to see through the walls. Inside, Kirk was now being asked if he had direct communication with anyone from Scrappy's camp regarding replacement decisions. Kirk hesitated before answering, and that hesitation was enough for officers to take notes. Young Jock noticed it too, and for the first time that night he stepped back slightly, distancing himself from both sides. Scrappy, standing outside, received another call. He answered it immediately, and this time he did not speak much. He listened. His face changed gradually from confusion to something more controlled. When the call ended, he stood still for a long moment, then quietly said to himself that this was not just about one event anymore. It was about who had been steering conversations behind closed doors for weeks. Inside, the officers were now asking Kirk about a second set of messages that had surfaced, allegedly showing discussions about scheduling replacements and contingency plans. Kirk finally admitted that conversations had happened, but claimed they were hypothetical discussions under pressure from external organizers worried about reliability and timing. But investigators were not fully convinced, because the pattern suggested coordination across multiple people rather than isolated conversations. Young Jock, feeling increasingly uneasy, told officers he needed to clarify something on record. He said he had been aware of general industry talk but never participated in any agreement to remove Scrappy from anything permanent. His voice was firm, but there was tension underneath it, as if he was trying to separate himself from a situation that kept expanding in scope. Outside, Scrappy was now leaning against a car, watching the entrance. The crowd had thinned, but the story had already escaped the building. Phones were still recording, posts were already circulating, and opinions were forming faster than facts. A security guard walked past him and muttered that the club would be dealing with this for weeks. Scrappy did not respond. Instead, he replayed the moment Kirk said the words about trust and reliability. That was the point where everything shifted from disagreement to rupture. Inside, Kirk was finally allowed to sit briefly while statements were taken. He looked tired now, less defensive, more reflective. When asked if he regretted the confrontation, he paused and said he regretted how it unfolded, not the decisions leading up to it. That answer did not fully satisfy the officers, but it revealed something important. Kirk believed the problem started long before the fight. Young Jock, sitting nearby, rubbed his forehead and said quietly that nobody walked into that night expecting alliances to collapse in public. But now, everyone was trying to reconstruct intent after damage had already been done. Scrappy finally started walking again, this time further away from the club, disappearing into the edge of the streetlights. As he moved, he received one final message. It was short, no explanation, just a name and a time. He stopped reading after that. Inside, Kirk was informed that he might need to return later for follow-up questioning depending on how the financial trail developed. Young Jock was also told the same. Both men exchanged a brief look, not hostile anymore, but uncertain. The night had shifted from confrontation to investigation, from emotion to evidence. Outside, Scrappy turned off his phone and slipped it into his pocket. For the first time since the fight began, he was not reacting to anything. He was simply thinking. And what he was thinking about was not just who said what, but who benefited from every version of the story that had unfolded. Behind him, the club doors finally closed, leaving Kirk Frost and Young Jock inside a system of questions that was far from finished, while Scrappy walked into the quiet street carrying a different kind of weight, the realization that the real conflict had not fully shown itself yet, and whatever came next would no longer stay inside one night or one building, because the damage had already moved far beyond the moment the first punch was thrown. Inside the club, the atmosphere had shifted completely from chaos to controlled tension, as officers finished collecting statements from Kirk Frost and Young Jock while keeping everyone separated to avoid any further escalation. Kirk sat quietly now, no longer arguing, just replaying the night in fragments, trying to understand where business decisions ended and personal fallout began. Young Jock remained nearby, still visibly conflicted, caught between loyalty, frustration, and the uncomfortable realization that he had been pulled into a situation where no version of the truth felt complete. Outside, Scrappy stood alone for a moment longer under the dim streetlights, watching the entrance like he expected one more explanation to come walking out. But nothing did. Instead, only silence followed the aftermath. The crowd had mostly scattered, but the recordings had already done their work. Clips of Kirk Frost, Young Jock, and Lil Scrappy inside that VIP section were circulating everywhere, each angle telling a slightly different story, each caption adding more confusion to an already unstable night. Scrappy finally turned away from the building and started walking without looking back. Every step felt heavier than the last, not because of the fight itself, but because of what it exposed. Trust was no longer just broken, it had been divided into versions, each person holding their own truth and refusing to fully let it go. Inside, Kirk was informed that further financial documents tied to the disputed event deal would be reviewed in the coming days, and that investigators were still tracing the missing payment references mentioned earlier in the night. That detail alone kept the situation from closing, because it meant the nightclub fight was now part of a larger ongoing inquiry rather than a finished incident. Young Jock, before leaving, asked one final question about whether anyone could confirm who originally escalated the confrontation, but the answer he received was vague, pointing instead to overlapping communication failures and unresolved business pressure between multiple parties. It was not a conclusion. It was a continuation of uncertainty. Outside, Scrappy stopped once more at the corner of the street, took a slow breath, and looked down at his phone before switching it off completely. Whatever messages were waiting, whatever names were being shared, he chose not to see them in that moment. Because for him, the loudest part of the night was no longer the fight, but the realization that loyalty had been questioned from more than one direction. Kirk Frost, in his own way, was facing the same truth inside, sitting in silence while realizing that decisions made in closed conversations had spilled into public damage that could not be reversed with explanations alone. Young Jock was left somewhere in between, neither fully blamed nor fully cleared, but clearly affected by how quickly trust had collapsed around him. And that is where the night ended publicly, though not emotionally, because none of the people involved left with closure, only with distance and unanswered questions. Fans watching online are now split, trying to piece together who initiated what, who knew what, and how deep the disagreements really went before the cameras caught the fight. Some believe Kirk Frost crossed a line in business decisions, others think Scrappy reacted too emotionally to incomplete information, while many are questioning whether young Jock was simply caught in the middle of something larger than all of them combined. But what remains clear is that nothing about that nightclub confrontation was isolated. It was the visible break in something that had been building quietly behind conversations, contracts, and unspoken tensions. And as the city moved on to the next morning, the impact of that single night continued to spread far beyond the walls of the club, leaving reputations unsettled and relationships fractured in ways that no one involved seemed ready to fully explain. If you followed this story to the end, you already know this was not just about a fight, it was about loyalty, trust, and the hidden pressure that turns business into personal conflict without warning. And now the question is not what happened inside that club, but what will happen next when all the private conversations finally become public truth. If you want more breakdowns like this, stay connected, because stories like this do not end where the cameras stop rolling, they continue in what people say afterward, and what they finally admit when the noise dies down.